So we're back, live committee and we're going to be taking up 6:14. We have a host of witnesses on schedule. I guess unless somebody has got a time restraint and needs to be on, sooner or later. Unless somebody speaks up, we'll kind of follow the list of witnesses as presented on the schedule. So, Mike Caraval, but, well, you've been waiting all morning,
Yeah, I make it a point to always be a little early.
yeah, well, it's good to be early. Better than to be late,
That's what they said in
and
the
they
Navy.
being late, I guess. Yeah, and people on the screen, they're all set.
They're the same.
So, good morning, and you're from Plainfield?
I am, sir.
Yeah.
Plainfield, Vermont. I lived there for like 32 years. Was a former owner of a number of different businesses in Montpelier, and currently I retired in 2012. And X amount of time later, I was victimized by some loggers, and as a consequence of that victimization, I learned how the industry actually operates. And I'm quite impressed with the honorable loggers that are out there. Sam Lincoln, Jed Lipsky, and a number of other ones that I've met. They've been really respectable and honorable people. But the bad part about that is over the years, going back at least 40 years, there's been no accountability for the nefarious loggers. And they have continued on performing those deeds of victimization. And the consequence of myself doing that, trying to get restitution for myself and the 28 others I've been representing, I've compiled a vast amount of information on the logging industry and the government as far as their actions to prevent these. And that's where I've come up with suggestions and a small chronology here, plus some suggestions here. I don't know what your time factor is on this, but Linda told me that you do have this. You have both these. This one here gives you kind of a chronology of what happened to me. And this one here gives you situational awareness as well as ideas above and beyond the proposal of the existing bill that could be incorporated into this to make the bill that we have now, which is quite good, maybe a starting point in what we need, but it is quite good. But there's certain things that it does not address. And I realize seizure and forfeiture are part of that. And
Well, yeah, and whether they own any of that equipment is bad guys, it's hard to tell.
well, yes, I understand that, and I can empathize with anybody that does own property that's either leased, rented, or whatever. And I think they've addressed that in previous seizure forfeiture things, so that they had an idea to do that. And I made a number of suggestions to states that already do seizure and forfeiture, such as Alabama and South Carolina. And Mike, who just left, mentioned Alaska as well. So there is documentation out there of stuff that does work versus contacting people that say it can't work. So anyway, I'd like to read this one here about my victimization. And if we have a second, I'd like to read this other one too, that gives you a wider perspective on what potentially could be done as well as the good bill that's on the floor. Yeah, whatever.
Well, we've got
Yeah, we have.
eight or so witnesses and we've
Yeah.
gotten tell numbers, so.
So I'll read just the first one, and if you've got the second one, then I would really appreciate if you do read it, because it gives you a larger scope of what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. To whom it may concern, thank you for asking me to testify today as a victim of nefarious loggers. I appreciate this opportunity to clarify my story of victimization by Conley Brothers Logging and point out many others were also victims of the Codlings and the Bacon family of loggers in northern Vermont. I admit I was naive in my understanding of entering into a contract with such hardened criminals, but my cousin was married to Paul Codling, and an adjoining neighbor was enjoying the execution of his contract with the Codlings to the best of my knowledge. I know now I should have contacted Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation or a forester on my selection of contractors. While they may not have been able to disclose the nefarious history of the three brothers, they could have guided me to an honorable business, or so I thought. I entered into both a verbal and written contract with the Codlings on September 6, 2018. I noted certain stipulations were needed to be put in place to clarify my position on the contract, and they agreed to these added stipulations and proceeded to continue working on the two adjoining properties. Shortly after, they came onto my property, dragging on logs to my neighbor's adjoining shared log landing. My neighbor approached me shortly after and asked if I had received any payment for logs. He had not, and it had been weeks. I told him that I had not received anything and contacted the other adjoining neighbor about his current experience with the Codlings. He stated he had been paid for the first 4 loads of logs a while ago, but nothing since then. We all realized something was amiss and collectively contacted David Codling concerning the matter. We are all told by David various stories of delays, deals, and about a fire in one of his tenants' apartments. Promises were made but never fulfilled. On December 31st, 2018, I heard some heavy equipment traveling above my house and realized Codling's logging operation was leaving our locations, headed to another undisclosed location with no acknowledgement of intentions. Shortly thereafter, I found their operation on an adjoining property and confronted David, and he told me he had used my money for a deal he had made and I would get paid Friday, which never happened. I went back to the landing later, only to confront Paul, who told me he was going to counterclaim, stating I owed him for tree service. This was never discussed or part of any contract. Later in court proceedings, the judge stated no evidence could be substantiated to support his claim, and I won the judgment. This was the start of my involvement with the Vermont State Police, the Attorney General's CAP program, Division of the AG's office, Washington County Superior Court, Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, Commissioner Mike Snyder and Danny Fitzko, Rep. Rob LeClaire, Vermont Forest Products Associations, numerous senators, and the Attorney General's Division. I don't want to forget Mark Mahaly. Because of the interaction with these parties, I have found at least 27 other victims with remarkably similar stories of victimization. Most are voting senior citizens with military service, with claims of non-payment, failure to adhere to both the verbal and written contracts, partial payments, and damage to properties. A good deal of those injured did not go to court because it was well known by the general public restitution was not going to be forthcoming. Most businesses pointed out they knew the system favors the predators, and throwing money at a lawyer was a waste of time and effort. They would be better off working to recap their loss. I, on the other hand, went to court, won the judgment, the counterclaim, the oral argument, and the Codlings failed to show for financial disclosure, their standard modus operandi. By this time, I realized the goalpost was constantly shifting at my expense, and when the judge asked me if I wanted to file a contempt of court charge, I reached saturation and contacted Rep. Mark Mahaly. He has been instrumental in helping me bring light on this ongoing situation. For me, this battle for justice started as an ongoing battle to make myself and others whole again monetarily. I soon realized it could not happen without the help of those in positions of authority. You and others could not only potentially recapture the lost nest egg many seniors were planning to use to enhance their livelihoods, but provide a strong deterrent to those taking unfair advantage of vulnerable citizens. Thank you for asking me to testify, and we, my victims group, past and possible future victims, look forward to your positive involvement in this long overdue problem. Thank you for your consideration.
Well, thank you. How many, like, how many acres or how many thousands of feet did they cut on your property?
Well, I had 7 acres. One section in the very back I didn't want them to cut on because it was my deer food plot. But the 2 adjoining acres, the neighbors were 7-acre parcels and we shared the same log landing. We all suffered basically from the same consequences doing business with that log.
7 acre, all
Yeah.
same.
21. But they range from one lady that was victimized, a senior citizen, while her husband was dying, and they came in and they pushed her out of the land management program because they took so many trees off. She had to go back and plant trees. She went to court, she got treble damages for $240,000 and she never realized any of that.
So triple, so she must have had 80,000 in damages
Well,
or,
what she sued exactly, and I know why you're saying that, 80,000 was what she was supposed to get because it was such an egregious act. The judge awarded her the other 160.
yeah,
But in the same sense, the reason I say we above and beyond that 240 is, as you know, there would have been 240 because everybody gets basically a third. So
yeah.
the judge, seeing how bad it was, awarded the other, but they actually got to spend $240,000 worth of trees.
So you won your judgment,
Mhm.
went through, I don't know, and you don't need to answer. Spent thousands probably preparing and hiring lawyers, or you did your own.
I did my own, and my girlfriend that passed away helped me, and she worked in legal offices, so with her making the documents out, you know, with anything that had to go online or the courts and judges or anything, she would type it up for me and she would send it out. So since she died, I've done that myself.
Yeah, but you got judgment, but no results from, is it Collins or what was the name of the logger?
Codling Brothers Logging, Paul, Joe, and David. David's the one that handled the contracts. The part that was really hard to understand was when I went to court and I won all those things. And they failed to show for the financial disclosure. The judge kind of jokingly looked down and he said, well, I guess they're not going to show. What would you like to do, Mr. Carroll? And I said, well, what are my options? He says, well, you can hold them for contempt of court. And I said, why should I hold them for contempt of court?
Yeah.
It's contempt of you and the court system, not me. And he says, well, I'm following protocol. I asked him if that made it right. He didn't answer. So then we moved on and I said, you know, Your Honor, this is your chance to make a difference. I have no clout. I said, you do. You could go to the legislature, tell them what happened, tell them you had 3 or 4 previous cases in this courthouse alone for the same thing. And you're gonna tell me I have to pay for this? And he said, you know what his answer was? Not my venue. And that's why we're here today, gentlemen and ladies. Is because this is an ongoing thing that nobody wants to address and get behind us, that the nefarious loggers are held accountable.
And do you have, I know you have another list of remedies that you were suggesting. But what can we do something like we talked a little bit about, like if you go to a retail theft, go to a store and steal something that's over $900,000, that's a felony. So, I mean, we could make this a felony, but
I believe Gary Kessler is going to address that as well.
okay. But the only, I know about one of the crews that you brought up early in your statement.
Vacants?
Yeah, And, I mean, to my knowledge, they don't have anything you can go get. I mean, the only thing I know that they have that would be a penalty to them is taking their time away. And you know what's involved if you take somebody's time away? A judge never puts anybody in jail anymore for some reason. You know, it's next to impossible for the criminal system to put people behind bars where they actually lose time. They have no money. They have usually very few assets.
Well,
I don't know what you can do to these people.
hopefully the bonding will make a difference, but
Well,
it doesn't really address going backwards. And the only reason a lot of these people aren't receiving restitution is because the attorney general, who had 250 cases, which they testified, and the district attorney said he had 2,500, said that they don't have the time to prosecute, the manpower and anything like that. But if there's no consequences, there's no reason to stop.
yeah,
There's got to be consequences, and they got to fit the crime. Now, I understand what you're saying. You can't confiscate stuff because they put it in other people's names. Well, that case, it was 250,000. 240,000 was a clear-cut case that the lawyer and the investigator that the lady hired said you can't get blood out of a rock. Yet they continued on victimizing with no stop.
no recourse.
So that needs to be addressed. And such as they said, when the Defender General come in, who wanted everybody to go free for everything, there has to be consequences. And if we can't get anything monetarily, then time is the answer. And that's got to fit for what they've done in a previous history of other crimes that have been committed. Should be the aggregate amount, not just single. Because if you haven't received a judgment, how do you expect to? And then the fines, the state of Vermont can't even get paid. They had 2 cases, well, more than 2 cases against the Bacons up north. They put it in the hands of the collector. They never got any money. The Codlings had 2. Here, they put it in the hands of the collector and they haven't received any money. So that sends a signal to everyone that wants to take advantage of everybody that go ahead, nothing's going to happen. You're free to do it.
I know the crew up there, they don't have any, I mean, that you can go and take.
Well, they used to send the foresters out to summons these people and tell them that they're violating different laws until they were threatened. That was by the Bacons with bodily injury, and they quit going. Then they sent the sheriffs. The sheriffs refused to go because they said the same thing. And then I believe they started using the game wardens and the state police.
Yeah, it's not a good situation. And, you know, for a landowner such as you or myself to confront these people, you know, that it's not good. No, we've got some serious problems and it's going to take a lot of serious thinking and work. But the court system has got to deal with these people, and I don't know how you make it mandatory that a judge hears these cases. Or the state's attorney, you know, like you said, we all know they've got hundreds of cases sitting on the docket. And yeah, so anyways, we're going to try to figure something out to help the victims, well, to help the future victims, because there is no help for you folks. You've already lost your.
I don't care if I get paid or not, sir. I just want this to stop. And if the others could get paid, especially the lady for 240,000.
That's terrible. Yeah.
But one other thing I want to add, and I know this gentleman over here doesn't want it, and I know a lot don't support it, but. And I can appreciate why they do it, because in a sense, he feels it's punishing the honest loggers, but. When I went to court and the judge asked me, he says, Mr. Carey, you didn't fill in an amount here for the suit. I said, that's because I don't know how much it is, sir. He says, what do you mean you don't know how much it is? I said, I had no idea how much they took off my property. And I said, I was never provided with a trip ticket. And he says, well, then we'll have to issue a subpoena and find that out. So I went to, they issued me one subpoena, and I'm naive of how the logging industry works. So they gave me the, and most other people are too. I went to Brighton's in New Hampshire, Bath, New Hampshire, with the one subpoena, which they denied me before because they said it belonged to, the information belonged to the Codney brothers. And I found out that they only do pine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So they got-
exactly. And it went to 3 other places, Andrew Koskins in Maine, Stan Robinson's down south in Vermont, and Chapeau in Canada. So then I had to chase all them down, which took me another month to get them because they didn't want to give it to me. Even though I had a legal document, they didn't believe the way it was written on the piece of papers that I had, that it was an actual document that required them to do it. They thought I just typed it up myself or something. So finally, after I got that, that's when I really realized how bad these loggers were. Because they said, like on the first guy, they paid him for 4 loads of logs. And they said, we're gonna pay you for the other 3 or 4, I forget which it is. And they never did. And then the second guy, it was between the 2 of us. They logged his whole land. He didn't get paid at all for the longest time until I started causing a stink. And people were looking at him, and then they paid him. And they made sure he signed the check saying paid in full, which wasn't true. And then myself, they never paid at all. But when I get the ability to go through all 3 people's log slip, mill slips and trip tickets, and I compared them, I found out there was 10 load of logs that came out of there that never had anybody's mark or designation on them, plus X amount for each one of us beyond, excuse me, what they said was ours. So without those, you have no idea.
No, the only way you'd have to have somebody,
And
had go in and measure the stumps and figure the footage.
exactly. And he and I talked about that upstairs a few minutes ago. For $800, he would do that. I've already lost a judgment, a counterclaim, an oral argument, and financial disclosure. And we know I'm never gonna get paid for that. Now, if I had a lawyer, it was a good thing I was able to have the spunk and my girlfriend to do this. Otherwise, I've had all those lawyers' fees. So add $800 to that. And then they're only gonna turn around in the end with the tools that everybody has currently to say, I'm sorry, we can't help you.
Yeah.
So then now that's insult to injury.
No, it's wrong. Any questions, Irene?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I'm just curious, when you say they have nothing, clearly they have vehicles to go to people's houses to do this. They must have some logging equipment. Wouldn't seizing even those basic things
That
help
was,
them to some
that
degree?
was-
Like I'm too new to this, I guess, but.
that's very true. And I tried to bring that up. All they keep thinking about, legal counsel and all them, is skidders, feller bunchers, tractor trailers. But you're right. How do they get there lots of times with their personal trucks? There's some of the stuff you could go after, but then again, you're running into that stuff you said a minute ago about trying to see something that belongs to someone else or if it's out of state, and I can appreciate that.
It could,
But the game wardens are engaged in that right now, seizing property. Their
Yeah.
trucks get seized, their guns get seized, anything and all said equipment used in the felony is
well, maybe Chris can help us with, you know, how many assets some of these folks might have. Yeah, but
Sorry for all the time.
No, well.
Yeah,
Is there any more questions?
yeah, I think all of us here are very sympathetic to what happened to you and the rest of the victims. My understanding of the problem with the seizure aspect is you almost are gonna need another agency in the state of Vermont government to keep track of it. Cause if you seize something, you gotta store it, then you gotta figure out how to sell it, and it adds layers of bureaucracy to it. I'm very sympathetic to, I think, the way the chair is leaning, that we start talking about jail time, because I don't know what else. You could have judgment after judgment after judgment awarded. If they're not gonna pay you, they're not gonna pay you, whether it's $10 or $10 million. So to me, that street's closed off. The seizing piece, and I know you mentioned 2 southern states that do it. I don't know how they do it. Where do they put all this stuff that they seize? How do they sell it?
I have an idea for that.
All right.
It was mentioned by legal counsel, I believe, in one of the, God knows how many other meetings I've been to. That the state needs to hire a professional that's versed in seizures and forfeitures. He would guide 3 deputies to be the administrators of that.
Yeah.
And as far as the seizure go, a third party would be in charge of seizures. You would contract out to somebody that would open their property up for the seizure process, just like the guns. Now R&L and Barry here takes and confiscates guns, hold them till a judgment is made that they can have them back, charges them for the amount of time that they've had it, according to whatever protocol they have. That third party would see the opportunity to take advantage of that. And they would be responsible for the seizure. Once a document comes down from some judicial person that says that the property can be released, then it can be, but then they gotta pay this guy to get it back.
Okay. I guess that's a possibility.
It's like everything, sir.
Got 4 people.
Yeah, now we're paying 4 people. I mean, somebody's gotta pay.
Well, that comes back to the thing I was saying, and that you're not gonna like this one either. Is the state of Vermont is looking for the money, it would come out of the general fund, or you have to expand your budget and whatnot.
Yeah.
New Hampshire does something that I find is quite interesting. If you're in the state of New Hampshire and you want to log, you have to have an intent to log letter. And then that gives them a appreciated value like he would do for the amount that you can expect to get out of that logging. And then the mill has a slip that they give, which was the actual amount that was taken out of there. If it looks copacetic to the other one, then that's accepted. The state of Vermont, because it doesn't have income tax, takes 10% off the top of the mill. And that used to pay for their enforcement and anything that the town needs, the municipality. You could take the same provisions, same concepts, and you would get whatever percentage you need for those 4 people you're talking about.
So the landowner and the logger, if it was 10%, usually it equals out to about the same. The landowner get half of the value of their logs and the logger gets the other half for cutting and transporting. Is it 50-50 or
In New Hampshire,
30 or 2/3?
No.
I'm not sure how it works. I think the landowner is responsible for the fuel tax.
But anyways, that's a thought. Other questions? Irene?
I know how we don't wanna put any more taxes on Vermonters, that's just been the theme, right? Don't we already do seizure of drug vehicles and things? I mean, seizure is not a new concept in Vermont, is it? Isn't there some department somewhere that's already doing seizure and would have some of these sites set up?
Fish and Game does.
Police
And
departments.
you're right, there are a number of
Well,
other.
I know the federal government does because you see them at the customs.
Right.
Where
And I
they-
made a suggestion to everyone that was saying this is too big a hassle for us to do. When at the last meeting, when the Defender General was there, that it was brought up that the biggest share of seizures and forfeitures that are done are done by the federal government. So why not turn that over to the federal government if in fact it's a violation of interstate commerce or international border lines?
That, that's something to think about. Because we only have a handful of sawmills in Vermont, most of that rough lumber is transported to Canada, New Hampshire, Maine. No. Well, anyways, if there are no other questions, we'll move on to Chris.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So,
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. For the record, Chris Delia, President, Vermont Bankers Association, a rare opportunity to sit before you.
yeah,
We appreciate it, I think. Uh,
it's a rough subject.
It is a rough subject. So this was brought to my attention last fall when Representative Mahali approached me about the issue. And in particular, in the bill he was working on, it was the seizure and forfeiture section, which we already have in Vermont statute. It is primarily related to drug-related issues. So we had a long conversation about that, but before I talk to that issue, I just want to, I guess, step back and say there's really a breakdown in the system here. And I'm not sure whether it's judiciary or law enforcement or whoever has the responsibility, but it just is mind-boggling that this type of activity could go on for decades and people aren't held accountable.
Yep.
So hopefully you can come to some solution that is acceptable to property owners that are being taken advantage of in a horrible way. So again, my involvement was discussions related to seizure and forfeiture. We see that again as it relates to drug activities, which is quite different than seizing a skidder or a large piece of equipment. You're seizing drugs, you're seizing weapons, you're seizing vehicles. Maybe you even go as far as seizing a home, but that home's not going to be moved to some place where you have to store it, and where you have a duty of care to maintain that piece of property or equipment. So in my involvement upstairs, which was early on, was to come at this from the perspective of the industry that I represent, which is the banking industry. And as you can imagine, if somebody's got a loan on a piece of equipment, these are not small purchases or not small loans, depending on the size of the skidder or a truck or whatever you've got out there that's different than a bunch of chainsaws or small equipment that you might drag into the woods with you. So in talking with Rep Mahali, we said we just want to make sure that if there's a loan on the equipment, that our interest is protected. He had no interest in changing the existing statutes. So from our perspective, we were fine. And if you're looking at that section, we'll be happy to come back in and chat with you about any potential language changes. But again, we just want to make sure that as lien holders, if they've got a loan on a piece of equipment, that their interest is protected in that case.
But that's already established and set up and.
Correct.
And I mean, I know you can't talk about customers, but
Right.
I'm wondering if in general, people that do these types of theft, if they are usually in good standing with their local banker. And I don't know if you've ever run across any of those situations, but in general, if you can answer that or not.
The way I can answer it is by creating awareness amongst my members for the session that this bill has been out there and discussed. I haven't had any of my members come to me and say, here's an example of a problem. And they're not going to give me information that's held private by the institution, but nobody has brought an answer forward to me that would address your question. I do have to believe that there are other assets, whether it's their home or personal vehicles or whatever it may be. But again, if there's no follow through on the part of judiciary or others, it's not going to make a difference to the property owners. As you said, Senator, $10 or $10 million. It does seem that your discussion about time and imprisonment may be a valid option for you to look at. I should say that at one point there were discussions upstairs in the agricultural committee that they were going to pull the seizure and forfeiture section out. And then ultimately it ended up that it's going to be a report that's going to come back to you from the Attorney General's office that will look at a number of things, including seizure and forfeiture. So we'll certainly watch and be involved as appropriate. But I mean, we sympathize with the property owners. This is just unbelievable. It's been going on this long, and how some bad actors can tarnish what otherwise is a very good industry.
Yeah, and, you know, if you had a person, they wanted to buy a 50-acre plot of land, a custom, and they came to you and said, I'd like to borrow X dollars, this 50 acres of bucks on to me, and I'd like to buy it. If that was the case, usually your banker's gonna say, well, what are you gonna put up for collateral? And you say, well, I'll use my other 50 acres or my health to cover the money to buy the next 50 acres, and so you hire a logger and he comes in and strips the new 50 acres that you just bought.
Yep.
The property owner is already now mortgaged their property to buy that 50 acres, or say 5 years later, they still own most of it.
Right.
You guys aren't gonna lose because you got the owner of it. You know, if they come in and say, hey, my property is basically not worth much anymore, just land holding the world together. The logs are all gone and I can't pay you. You go get the house and the other 50 acres and
Not an ideal situation. But to your point, the activities that were described to you earlier can have a detrimental impact on the value of that property, which is used as collateral to secure the loan. So depending on where that owner is and the stage of the life of that loan, they could find themselves underwater pretty quickly because the value of that timber has now been stripped from that property. How that works out over time is I wouldn't want to speculate, but it does certainly have an impact on what they've put up for collateral in order to buy, in order to secure that.
other questions for Chris?
So, yep, happy to come back if you have any questions for me or be a further assistance in looking at language.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Good to see you.
Same here.
Dana, are you on the screen?
Yep.
Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see all of you. You can hear me and see me okay?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'll get started. I did send a testimony along to Linda this morning, so you should have that available to you. I'm also going to reference an attachment as well. So that's also attached to my testimony. So I'll try to paraphrase and not take too long. I know you've had a long morning thus far and you've got quite a few more folks on the docket here to speak, but I apologize. I couldn't be there in person. I will be in the building on Friday, but I'm over in Maine right now and I've got another hearing this afternoon at the Maine legislature. So you can't be in two places at once. So I appreciate the opportunity to come before you on Zoom. So Senator Starr, Senator Collmore, members of the Senate Committee on Agriculture. My name is Dana Duran. I'm the Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast. I've appeared before your committee previously this session, but just as a reminder, PLC is a trade association that represents logging and associated trucking contractors throughout the Northeast, including here in the state of Vermont. In a few minutes, you'll hear from Sam Lincoln from Lincoln Farm Timber Harvesting. Sam is a board member of the PLC. So I appear before you today on behalf of our membership in Vermont to testify in support of H614. Timber harvesters are generally, as you can probably imagine, not in favor of more government regulation. However, we believe that the legislation before you is an important step forward to professionalize the industry in Vermont, protect landowners, and ensure that the industry moves forward without a black eye that is festered here, as you've heard from Mr. Caraveau, for decades. I also want to thank Representative Mahaley, the House Ag, Food Resiliency, and Forestry Committee, as well as the House Judiciary Committee, for supporting this legislation and taking a very broad approach to it over the last several months. Representative Mahaley did come to us back in December with this idea, and we worked very closely with him to ensure the legislation would be something that we could support. While not opposed to the premise and reason for the bill, we did not want this bill to be a one-size-fits-all approach that could ultimately harm contractors that did something by accident or unknowingly. This was by far the biggest issue that our membership in Vermont felt strongly about, was that accidents do happen, and contractors who admit fault and or pay their debt should not be held liable nor be subject to the stipulations in the bill. Thus, it is our belief that the language before you does indeed protect those who do things by accident and are willing to own up to their mistakes. It has enough fail-safe protection in it that those who do make mistakes and pay their debts will not be swept up with those who don't. We also believe that the legislation before you today is not inconsistent with which exists in other states. As an example, I have attached the statute and rules created in Maine, which deal with this very issue. In 2013, the Maine legislature provided the Maine Forest Service with statutory authority to create rules that would require a habitual offender previously convicted of timber theft and or timber trespass on 2 prior occasions in the last 5 years to receive written approval from the Maine Forest Service to operate, to post a private bond in the amount of $500,000, and be subject to work stoppage if requirements of the law were not being met. Maine, and I do want to stress this, Maine has a very diverse Forest Practices Act with civil and criminal penalties for timber trespass and timber theft, which are under the direct authority of the Maine Forest Service and the Attorney General. But for the purposes of comparison, the authority provided by the bill before you today would be very similar to Maine. And again, I attached that to my testimony just for an example. While we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, we do believe that there is an elephant in the room that must be dealt with if this legislation goes forward, and that issue is enforcement. In discussions with Representative Mahaley and the House Ag Committee, as well as House Judiciary, we asked that the bill be amended to include a study due back to the House Ag Committee on or before January 15th, 2025, which would focus on 4 primary pieces: current issues pertaining to the enforcement of timber theft and trespass law. Second, a summary of what is being done in other states to effectively enforce timber theft statutes. 3, recommendations for staffing and budget implications to improve such enforcement and prevention to ensure consumer protection. And 4, a recommendation of whether and how property used to commit fraud or trespass could be subject to seizure. The Attorney General would lead the study, along with assistance from the Department of Forest, Parks and Rec, Department of Public Safety, our organization, the Vermont Forest Products Association, and other interested parties. And we are pleased to see the House Ag Committee included it, and the House Judiciary Committee did amend it slightly to add that 4th piece regarding seizure. So in closing, we believe that this is a well thought out solution to a decades-long problem, and thank the committee for providing the opportunity to present the opinion of our membership. I'm happy to answer any questions, and thanks again for letting me testify by Zoom.
Yes, thank you for your testimony. I'm wondering, Dana, do you hear much of, timber theft in Maine or New Hampshire? Do you hear much about that? Does it happen? How does the bonding procedure, is that stopped any of this?
Yeah, great questions, Senator Starr. So, I won't speak directly to New Hampshire, but I will speak directly to Maine. So, timber trespass, timber theft was an extreme issue. I would say take Vermont back 10 years, and that's really what was happening in Maine. And so this statute that I referenced and provide a copy of was put in place. And it has made a significant difference. I mean, the word has spread. Folks know that if they are prosecuted by the attorney general for either one of those crimes, then they certainly are not going to be able to go back to work. I mean, a $500,000 bond is a big deal, to be able to provide that as an insurance policy, as well as a couple of other provisions are there. So that has been a major help. But I'll also add this, as I mentioned in my testimony, Maine's regulatory regime is much, much different than Vermont. Maine has a Forest Practices Act. Maine requires forest operations notifications are submitted by a harvesting contractor, landowner, or forester prior to any commercial harvest commencing. And then it has to be received and then documented by the Forest Service. The Forest Service also has at their disposal, which Vermont does not, is a group of forest rangers who are out inspecting all of those forest operations notifications. If you are a contractor and you do your duty and you file the notification, you will expect to receive a visit from a forest ranger sometime during your harvest. Lastly, Maine, because of the Forest Practices Act, requires trip tickets in addition to a forest operations notification. So a load of wood cannot leave a landing without a trip ticket. A load of wood cannot be received by a purchasing entity, whether that's in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, or Canada, without a trip ticket. So there is a documented paper trail with who buys wood, who sells wood, where wood gets delivered, and that's required by law. Again, Vermont does not have that. So this is bigger than just the statute. There is, as I mentioned in my testimony, there's the enforcement side of this that has to be looked at in Vermont. So putting another statute in law is not going to bring about some panacea or utopia that's going to stop the bad actors. We must look at that bigger picture.
So,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
so you mentioned trip ticket before they leave the property with the wood. Who scales the wood to determine the trip ticket footage?
Sure. Good. Another good question, Senator Starr. So your trip ticket is going to be in triplicate. So, and sometimes quadruplicate. So when a load of wood leaves a landing, a copy of that trip ticket and its destination, so you have to provide information on where it's headed, must be provided to the landowner, or if they have a licensed forester, it must be provided to that licensed forester on behalf of that landowner. When it is then delivered to said point of delivery, another trip ticket must be left with that facility, and then so on and so on until that round wood or raw wood is then manufactured and processed into value-added products. So essentially there's, again, a paper trail. The actual scaling is going to be done, whether it's in weight scale or if it's in international rule, wherever it's heading. So in sawlog case, it could go to a purchaser at a yard. They're going to scale the wood. Then they're going to provide a check for the value of that wood, along with another copy of that trip ticket. And then state law in Maine allows the Forest Service to require receipt of each trip ticket along the way. So that information has to be provided if requested by the Forest Service.
Brian?
Thank you, Bobby. So Dana, it's good to see you and thanks for your testimony. It's also good to know that, you know, we have kind of a tradition in Vermont of, we love being number one. So it's good to hear that you have bad actors in Maine as well, and that maybe we're not number one on that list.
Sure.
I'm curious about, and you've had this in effect for about 10 years. I think you said 2013 was when the statute was put in play. Is there anything in your statute there that includes a seizure provision or a criminal penalty provision?
It does not. I mean, well, two directions on this. So the Attorney General does have the authority to press charges from a criminal perspective. You know, if a fine is not paid, they can take that. So they have the authority to do that. I don't think we've gotten to that point in Maine. And I apologize, Senator Collmore. The second part of your question, just repeat that for me.
The criminal penalty. So you mentioned the Attorney General. What about seizure?
Oh, seizure, yes. Seizure is not part of the Maine statute. I think, you know, when the Maine legislature considered this, when the Forest Service put forth this recommendation for statute, there was no requirement for seizure. They did not feel that they wanted to get into that level of minutia. They also didn't feel that there was a process in place. And so they really felt that, you know, the AG's process, the AG's authority, whether we got to this level of requirement for bond, forest operations notification, shutdown, et cetera, that they would have to go that route. So they steered clear of forfeiture and seizure.
Yeah, I thank you for that. It seems like, and you've been at it longer in Maine than we have here, in terms of kind of the organization of the professional loggers and contractors and stuff. So it seems like almost a proactive sort of stance that Maine was able to take to put things in place before it reached a certain point, which we don't have that ability yet here. So I guess you're doing a hell of a job, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, you know, and I'm not going to say that the process is perfect here. You know, there are regulatory issues, there's oversight, there's contractors who feel like they, in some respects, get targeted from time to time. So I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, but I will tell you that from a professional regulatory environment regime, having that Forest Practices Act in place, having forest operations notifications, having trip tickets really provides a paper trail that I don't think, you know, Vermont doesn't have access to. So that is part of the study. We're not being prescriptive that should be an end result in Vermont. Vermont needs to decide what's in Vermont's best interest, but I think those need to be under consideration because, again, you know, our Forest Practices Act went into place in 1993, predominantly because of clear-cutting referendum that came to Maine. And so it was put in place and the people really spoke and it's done a very good job. And it's expensive, you know, and when I mentioned that we have forest rangers who are out and about, there are, you know, close to 100 forest rangers on staff with the Maine Forest Service who are out inspecting jobs. So, you know, you don't have that in Vermont, and I'm not sitting here advocating for it, but that is a big difference.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dan. I appreciate that.
Sure thing.
You're probably twice or a little more bigger than Vermont, so we would only need 45 million. Any other questions for Dana? I guess we're good to go, Dana, and thanks for your time and your testimony. We'll hopefully see you Friday.
Sounds good. Thank you, Senator. Good to see all of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Gary Kessler.
Gary's here.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thanks very much for.
Welcome to a wonderful subject.
Well, I'm coming to you. I know some of you from my time at the State House. I've been retired from state government for almost 3 years now, happy to say. And in the end, I guess I've worked in a lot of the different areas that this bill is dealing with. And I had provided some comments in the House, so I guess my name is on the list to provide more comments. So happy to do that. Sorry I couldn't appear in person this morning, but I'm glad I have the opportunity via Zoom. So just a little bit about me. As I said, I worked in state government for most of my career. I retired about 3 years ago. I started at the state's attorney's department and was a criminal prosecutor for just about 10 years. I worked at the Agency of Natural Resources. I was an environmental prosecutor, and then eventually I was the director for the Compliance and Enforcement Division. We dealt very frequently with loggers, and some of the names that you've heard here mentioned as essentially criminal loggers were ones that we dealt with too for a slightly different reason. We were charged with enforcing the acceptable management practices. And so these same loggers that steal from people also often leave a mess on their property that the homeowner or landowner is now responsible for having to clean up, because the logger doesn't come back and do it. And usually the property owner doesn't want him back anyway, if we catch them with having committed violations. And then my last 5 years in state government, I was at the deputy commissioner at the Department of Liquor, and then the governor thought we did a good job, and I was at Liquor and Lottery, running the state's businesses. So that was a pleasant last 5 years of work. Anyway, so back to the logging issue. I mean, when I say criminal loggers, this is really just a very tiny percentage of the loggers that are out there working. Unfortunately, they're the ones doing all the damage to these homeowners, to these property owners. And we tried, and I think the unit that I was responsible for, the Compliance and Enforcement Division, took any and all steps we could to bring enforcement action against these bad actors when we catch them. At the time I was there for 18 years. We worked on some very major logging violations, including getting the heavy cut law passed that we have in place in Vermont now. That resulted from a logging operation that was really a disaster up in the Northeast Kingdom, up in Concord, with the Chet and Reginald McLean. But I also had the opportunity to prosecute the Bacons on many occasions. And I wanted to just share a story with you about that. We had prosecuted them several times. We had got judgments against them in environmental court. They did not pay those judgments. And they continued to do just what they've continued to do all along, which is continue to take advantage of people and steal from them. We got to the point where I went to court and obtained an order from a judge to allow us to seize their logging equipment. I truly believe that that's the most effective tool. Everything else that's been talked about sounds great when you're dealing with an entity that wants to continue in the business or wants to have a legitimate business. But when you're dealing with a criminal, the idea that they'll have to put up a bond is, and from my perspective, somewhat laughable. Yeah, put up a bond. Okay, what happens when we don't? I don't know. What happens when they don't? We chased them around. We got the order from the court to allow us to seize their equipment. My investigators that we had, have a number of it that are in Compliance Enforcement Division, located their equipment in multiple different locations. We worked with the county sheriff and with Fish and Wildlife to provide some backup to seize the equipment. We provided the sheriff with the orders from the court, and the sheriff declined to seize the equipment, citing 12 VSA 2470, which is a very old statute that if you look through it, it says, people are entitled to so many chickens and so many cows and so many goats and their equipment that they need for their livelihood. So the sheriff believed that it wouldn't be okay for him to go ahead and seize the equipment despite the court order. So we didn't, we weren't effective at seizing the equipment. But I can tell you now that it's nearly impossible to make a living dragging wood out of the woods on your back. If you don't have a skidder, and you don't have equipment to move that wood after it comes out and bring it to a mill, you won't make money. If you don't have a pickup truck to drive to the job site, you won't be able to steal from people. I mean, these just are, this is, unfortunately, we're kind of at this most basic thing. What will it take to get these people to stop? Certainly you're correct, jail is one of them, but having been a criminal prosecutor and have friends that still are, I can tell you now that they just don't really have the resources, and this won't be a focus. And as the chair has already acknowledged, it's unlikely, since these often aren't violent crimes, they're just property crimes, that no one will be sent to jail as a consequence. In one of the prosecutions with the Bacons, we had required that they provide us with reporting whenever they were going to do any logging. So this way they would have to give us advance notice where they were going to log. Well, guess what? They didn't do it because they don't want to do it, because then we'd be on to them, right? And we could warn people. I'll just tell you another story as an aside. A colleague of yours in the House who had been chair of this isn't just people that are just, gullible or just don't know what's going on. This was a member of the legislature who was chair of House Judiciary, and our families know each other. And he contacted me and said he'd been approached by some loggers to do some logging on a woodlot that he had. And he wanted to know a little bit more, about if I could provide him with any information. So I asked him who the name of the loggers were. When he told me it was the Bacons, I told him to run and never speak with them again. And also monitor his property and make sure that they don't go on there and take the wood when you're not looking, basically. So that's really the practice. I can tell you that in my experience with the Bacons, one of the wife or the mom would do solicitations herself. A nice letter out to somebody saying, hey, we're going to be in your neighborhood. We're going to be doing some logging. I wonder if you have any trees you need to have cut down. Maybe, you could make some money. We could help you out. It all sounds great. The problem is that the average consumer just doesn't really know about it. The other thing about these particular loggers is they're not really doing so much large commercial jobs. That job I mentioned with the McLeans, they were cutting 1,000 acres, basically. That's a large commercial job, and they clear cut it as well. But a lot of these other operators like the Codlings and the Bacons, I also had a lot of interactions with the Codlings. We did get them to pay their fines, fortunately, at least the time when I was there. But they're doing much smaller, almost kind of like backyard logging. You're talking about, like one of your earlier witnesses talking about 7 or 8 acres. That's not really a giant commercial operation, and a lot of times it just goes under the radar. The owner gets ripped off. Their property is a mess. They're left to clean it up, and they never get paid, and the state doesn't even know anything about it. As far as the timber trespass goes, I think the state hasn't. The Attorney General's office has prosecuted cases when it's involved state land that I'm aware of. So there was some gentlemen that decided they were going to cut on state land and make some ski trails up in the J area. There was another gentleman who lived on the Green River Reservoir and really wanted a better view and access. He also cut wood off state land. Those people did get prosecuted by the state for those violations. But oftentimes these timber trespass actions are looked at as something that a citizen needs to bring on their own. Somebody trespassed on your property, you need to take action on your own, and most people just don't have the resources for that. And further, even if they do and they're persistent, these criminals just don't respond to these civil actions, and they don't show up in court, and there's just no good outcome, really in the end. So I feel like that as far as actually being able to have an impact on these criminals, we need to either put them in jail, which I think for the reasons I mentioned is unlikely to happen, or we need to take their equipment so they can't log anymore. If they don't have a chainsaw, they don't have a skidder, they don't have a feller buncher, they don't have a logging truck, they don't have a pickup truck, they're going to have a hard time, doing what they're doing to these people. So those seem like the really only viable solutions. Again, you tell them they need to get a bond, they just won't do it, but they'll be out logging the next day. So that's, I hate to give the harsh reality, but that's really what it, comes down to from my experience. And again, working for the Agency of Natural Resources, we had a lot of resources we could devote to this. That was our job to, go after these violators. It wasn't on the criminal side, but, trying to get them to clean up their act and clean up the land, and not rip people off. And we had success with those that were actually in the business and were good business people and were honest loggers, because again, sometimes they just make mistakes and they would clean it up, no problem. On the other hand, with the criminal loggers, it's very hard to have have an impact. And further, I'd say with the Bacons, there's certainly been some history of physical violence that was mentioned earlier that, makes those that have to go out and investigate and deal with them, concerned for their well-being as well. So it's just something else to keep in mind.
Yeah, well, thank you, Gary. Have you ever thought about posting, the bad loggers or loggers that have been prosecuted, like a nice ad in a statewide newspaper on, something on Facebook,
Post
One-
office.
with a list of the names of, is that anything that's ever been tried?
It's a good
Sure. So
concept.
I will tell you that, yes, we did it in a certain way. So when I was at the Agency of Natural Resources, I had made the decision that we would do press releases on the cases. They don't have to be logging cases, any environmental cases. We want to issue press releases because not only do we want to deter the specific violator that we caught and that we penalized, but we also want other people to know that we're out there, that we're catching people. And then when we do, there's a consequence to it. So that's a general deterrence. So we would issue press releases on all of our cases, try to get the media to pick that up. They're public, they're online. I believe still, I checked recently and they were, so that, somebody can find that out. If somebody asked me, I felt free to tell them that, as again with that particular legislator, Tom Koch, not to work with these loggers. I felt okay doing that. What I found was that the state foresters were more reluctant to be identifying specific individuals. They might make a recommendation like, you might want to hire a forester before you get involved with this logger. It's not so direct. And so, just having a list, what would we call it? Bad loggers, criminal loggers. One of the other thoughts that I had proposed in the House, and I think this goes to the testimony earlier about professionalizing logging, would be having some very low cost logging license system. So it would be professionalized with the Secretary of State's office. It could be very inexpensive, $10 a year to get signed up and get a license. But it would be a central place. It would be a control point to some level where citizens could go and check this database and see if the person is actually a licensed logger or not with the state of Vermont, make it illegal not to have a license, and provide the state this control point where when we do get convictions, whether it's for civil or criminal, that the logger's license can be suspended and that would be noted that their license was suspended. I don't think, the Secretary of State's office already has a whole system built for licensing all different kinds of professions. This would just be one more. I don't think it would be particularly expensive. There wouldn't be a big build out of an IT system. It already exists. Loggers could sign up, get licensed. And then when you have a logger that has outstanding violations, their license would be suspended or revoked. And that would be a list that anybody could check. Part of the problem is educating citizens that there's a place to go to check, to be cautious. Just because somebody comes, knocks at your door and says, hey, I'm in the neighborhood, I could cut down some trees if you got some trees to be cut down. Oh, wow, yeah, I do actually. And then the next thing they know, they've cut down those trees. They've cut down a whole bunch of other trees and they've gone onto the neighbor's property and cut their trees too. And now you and your neighbor are in a big fight and they left you a big mess. And you're stuck. So I do think that would be another control point. Will it prevent these criminal loggers from continuing to log even if they don't have a license? No, but you could criminalize that. And maybe that would be another opportunity to tag them for a penalty or whatever else it may be. Just another thought.
Yeah, a question, Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Harvey. So I think I've been on this committee too long because I had the exact same question that the chair did a minute ago about somehow we have to make it known to people who own forest land that there are bad actors and there's potential for great financial loss. I don't know how to do that. He mentioned Facebook, which is great. Every time in your position, Gary, at one time in the Attorney General's office, a news story could be generated that would go on television and radio that identifies somebody that was caught up in this and that got convicted, basically. And I think that helps out too. I guess I'm not as big a fan of more government registration, all that kind of stuff. Because again, if you're a criminal, you're a criminal. You're not going to pay any attention to that kind of thing, to my way of thinking. But I think the more people that understand that the people that come around and say, hey, by the way, I'm in the neighborhood, just like when you want your driveway paved. And that's happened to me 2 or 3 different times where people all of a sudden drive in and say, yeah, I'm in the neighborhood and I'm gonna do your neighbor's driveway. Would you like to do it, for $200? Well, no, thanks. I'll sort of research it myself and find somebody that I trust, but yeah, so I don't know how to get the word out. I know there are woodland magazines that probably would be helpful in identifying people that aren't on the up and up, so to speak, but I appreciate your efforts and I'll be quiet. I'm dying to hear from 2 people that I have a lot of respect for, Ed Larson and Sam Lincoln here too, so.
And I know Ed from way back when, but I think on the licensing front, I agree. I'm not, all that keen on trying to have more government regulation, more licensing. But on the plus side, it would professionalize the good loggers, and it would provide a central place for citizens to go to find out whether a logger is actually licensed or not. You can put it on Facebook, but unless they go and look for it, and it would be the same for the Secretary of State's database. But at least if they thought, somebody came and said, "Hey, I'm a licensed logger. Here's my license, and you can check me out on here." It would be a good spot. Also, violations or problems could be collected there as well, so somebody could see that this logger had a problem in the past. Again, I was thinking of a way to do it very cost effectively and very low cost to loggers, but it would at least somewhat out these criminal loggers. Even if you post things every day, people still have to know to check. And when you're just a homeowner, with 8 acres or 10 acres, you're not really in the logging world. You're not in current use. None of that really applies to you. And so you're just, thinking, wow, this nice person is going to come by and do me a favor and I'll make a few bucks and it's all good until it isn't. That's basically what it comes down to. So it's certainly a challenging situation, and we're really dealing with the sort of lowest common denominator. And how do we address this, essentially criminals? How do we do it if we don't send them to jail? And that's really the challenge. If they don't have equipment, though, I guarantee it will be difficult for them to continue to rip people off. I used an example in the house. If we had a crook that had lock-picking tools and they got caught, we wouldn't say, well, we can't take their lock-picking tools because they won't be able to make a living anymore because we've taken their tools away, right? I mean, it's sort of the same here. If they don't have the equipment, they won't be able to do it. I know they can try to put it in different names. I'm certainly sympathetic to the bankers who might loan money around this. Again, they should know their customers, maybe, and look to see whether they have a license to log. If we had licensing and say, you don't have a license to log, I don't think we should loan you money to get logging equipment, or you've had a bunch of violations, or your equipment's been seized in the past. I'm not going to loan you money to buy more equipment that might get seized again. On the seizure front, when I was at Liquor and Lottery, we occasionally would catch bootleggers, essentially people that were transporting large quantities of liquor from New Hampshire liquor stores through Vermont to New York, typically. And when we did, not only did we seize the liquor that they had, and then we resold it in our stores, but we also would try to seize the equipment that they were using to move it. So if they had a vehicle, oftentimes they'd have a specially modified vehicle with suspension upgraded so they could fill it full of alcohol, like a Suburban, fairly large vehicle. We would, work to seize that and sell that. So again, if they don't have the equipment, they can't, it makes it hard to do it again, basically. That's it. So that is out there. It is being done, or it's being tried in different places. So it's not, I hate to say, it's not impossible. It could be done with the right thinking. And the Attorney General's study, I think, would be helpful. I just hope that whatever they come up with, I know it's difficult to get legislature's attention the next session to say, hey, we're going to go look at this again. We just passed a bill last session. Do we have to pass a bill again? Can we wait a little bit before we take it up? I know that can sometimes happen. So, as long as there's some commitment to looking at it next session, if you're all there, that certainly would make the report more worthwhile.
Thanks, Gary.
Well, thank you, Gary. Well said.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we still got one more.
Anyway, thanks very much for taking the time. Good luck.
Well, thank you.
Gary.
It's good to see you.
Bye-bye.
You're up next.
Okay.
Then we have Sam Lincoln and the commissioner after that. Yeah,
If you're under a time constraint, I'm happy to yield.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Always have to yield to the commissioner. Morning. It's got a lot.
yeah,
A lot. I'm Ed Larson. I'm the lobbyist for the Vermont Forest Products Association. This is a big bill. This is an important bill. It's one of our priorities. And I thank you for the opportunity to talk to. I see you now have possession of the bill. Thank you for that. Well, it's been a few years since I've been in front of this committee even. And I gotta say, it's probably been, last time I sat in this chair in this room, Jeff Spalding was chairing the education committee. I was talking about the American Sign Language as a curriculum.
we still got the chair of the education.
He just doesn't get to sit in the big chair in the morning.
Well, this was small, and I wanted to question.
That was the only time I testified and said that. Anyway. 8614, I want to start by thanking Mike Carrick, who, he contacted me a few years ago. Trying to find some resolution to this, and I explained to him the trials and tribulations I had been through. As the former executive director of the association, I am now the lobbyist for. This is my third time working on timber trespass in this building. And each time we thought we had found the thing that's gonna work. We have now tools that are gonna do the job. And it is true, we have the stiffest penalties in the region for stealing timber. And even for breach of contract. But it still wasn't making a difference. Again, as you have heard, enforcement is the elephant in the room. And getting action in front of the judge that actually means something has been very, very difficult to come up with. Now, I represent a big organization. We've got over 300 members. 40% of them are logging contractors. And I want to say these are honest, law-abiding business people. And, but we've had this issue throughout history. I mean, when the king owned the trees and you stole the king's trees, you were beheaded. So it goes back that far.
Yeah.
Now, it's kind of gotten a little bit more difficult lately. I think a lot of it is because of our land ownership patterns. We're getting more and more absentee type landowners. People that don't live here, that own land, and then come to vacation here or visit their land and find that it had been scathed off and they don't know what to do. This bill, and Representative Mahilly came to me a year ago. And after Mr. Caribou got a bug in his ear about this, said, I'm trying to find a solution. I have a few ideas. And we worked together throughout since then on a couple of different drafts. We were very helpful, hopefully, in helping guide him and helping him guide us to what we think will work. And I gotta say, I think this bill could be, it doesn't. One thing that is not being talked about, and you were just kind of going there with this list, is that this does require that if you're convicted, that you're on a register at the AG's office, you're on a list. Now, people have come to us, even Mike asked me a few years ago, why don't you go out there and advertise who these bad actors are?
Yeah.
Because we would be subject to liability suits. We just can't risk that. And I think that's what some of the state foresters were having the same problem with. I make an accusation, I could be liable. And I could be in front of a judge for a liability suit. I have to hire lawyers. Well, our association has a hard enough time paying for a lobbyist, and lawyers. So that was not an option for us. And I think we all appreciate that. But if you are convicted, Attorney General, now empowered, this passes. Put that name on the list, and that's something we can plan. I can say to Mr. Landowner, go to that website, look at that list. If you don't want to hire a forester as your agent, at least look at that list, and those are the people you want to avoid. And I think that if I was a logging contractor, the last place I want to have my name on is on that register. Because I know the Department of Forest and Parks is going to put the word out on that. We're going to put the word out on that. And eventually it'll become common knowledge in our industry that you don't want to be on that list. I think that's the magic bullet in this bill, the whole thing. The whole bonding thing and all that is good. The penalties are all fine. There is jail time in there. All that is good and important. But I think the register is probably the biggest piece in there that we can deal with. The other part is that breach of contract is no longer civil, it's criminal in this law. And that's another thing. In home improvement statute, you created what, 6, 7, maybe 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Does the same thing, and that's what this is tied to. And it seems to be working in the construction industry. Can't see how it wouldn't work here. You breach your contract, knowingly. Okay, I mean, we make mistakes. I'm doing a timber trespass right now, with a logger who made an honest mistake. And I'm trying to find a resolution between him and the landowner who he trespassed on to take care of it. And there are a number of remedies that you can do to fix it. And one is you should pay the landowner. Thing is to agree on what that should be. And that's sometimes the tricky part. The worst part is with their family. Then there's lawyers and there's everything involved. That's the mess. But anyways, this bill really does have some tools in there that I believe will bring law enforcement to the table, will bring the judiciary system to the table, and will finally be able to have some action that could begin to really slow down this bad actor scene.
So your crew supports the bill the way it is.
We worked very hard with the committees in the House. There were some changes that were made that we supported. We did like the seizure forfeiture piece that the House Ag Committee put through. But we did appreciate the roundabout discussions the Judiciary Committee had, the difficulty they had with it. So when they asked, would you support us taking it out? I said, as long as you can get it to come back with some recommendations, perhaps from the Attorney General, since there's already a study there for them, and they chose to go ahead and put it in that study. So it will come back, and I agree with Mr. Kessler that sometimes it's tough to revisit a bill after you've already acted on it, but hopefully they'll come back with some good recommendations. And they will look at who's going to lead on this enforcement. I mean, I kind of like the game plans. That's me personally. State police, another good option. But they need training and they'll need some resources. So there is going to be, some challenges and really circling back and fine tuning this and finalizing the whole package so that we do have enforcement. And we do have.
Game wardens are fine, but what about the foresters? We have one in each county.
The Department of Forest and Parks could do the investigation and then the game wardens could do the enforcement. And that's a model that I can see coming back from the AG's office. But that would be, of course, a willingness on agency and natural resource staff to be able to show how they could put that kind of a package together. I've done 3 or 4 of these as a forester representing both sides. The landowner who has trees taken and a logger who mistakenly crossed the line and took trees that he didn't know he was not supposed to have. In my history, they've been pretty amicable as far as the willingness to come to an agreement, resolve it, and keep it out of the enforcement and out of the judiciary system. We just do it as honest citizens. We made a mistake, let's fix it. And that's what happens 90% of the time. But there are those bad actors, and we know who they are. It's funny, the exact same actors that we've heard about, the Bacons and the Conleys, were the same 2 that drove the last 2 times we were talking about this law.
Wow.
Same people.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I had a sawmill business back in the 80s in Cabot. And the Conley shipped to me. Okay?
Yeah.
And when a landowner came to me and said, do the Conley ship to you? I go, from time to time they do. Well, they didn't pay me.
Wow,
So I told that lawyer
that was back in.
in 1986, 85, 86, we're talking 40 years ago. I told that lawyer they can't ship here. That's hard to do for them. So we need wood. That's how we make our living. Sometimes you run a little thin on wood, so you don't want to shut off loggers. But it's true, the contract is between the mill and the logger. And and other mills have done that to the contract. That's why they're shipping as far away as eastern Maine, northern Quebec, central New York. I mean, they're shipping further and further away. And you can put all these safeguards you want, trip tickets and licensing and all that. It's not going to stop this. I think this bill, the register and the criminality of the contract are the 2 things that are going to do it. You can make all the honest guys do trip tickets all day long. I require trip tickets when I'm the agent for a landowner on a job because it helps me keep track of things. But I don't think it's right to tell them mandate it. I don't think it's right. There are a lot of reasons why it's very difficult, complicated, and to what end? To stop trespass? No, it won't do it because you can't make a Canadian mill follow the law. They don't care about trip tickets. So, I think we got to think about all those things. And that's where the Attorney General report is going to come back and with some food for thought on it. So, yeah, hopefully we can get this through without a whole lot more new changes. I'm happy to work with this committee and the corresponding judiciary to get this to the end and to the governor's desk. And thank you very much for your time. I can answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ed Irene.
Let's just stop any one of these bad actors from showing up at a widow's door with tons of force behind her and giving a different name.
But in here, they
I'm
are,
Bob Smith, I'm here to help you with some trees, you know, I mean, well, his name's on the list, I guess he's okay,
and they offered me 6 figures from a wood.
right?
Wow, they see
So,
money,
I
I'm good
mean,
for the
there's
rest of my
always a
life.
way around this, and that's what I'm worried about
There's a lot.
is someone lying back there.
So, the biggest challenge we'll have, if this becomes law, is to how do we educate 80,000 landowners that there's a registry to look at? That, and we made these attempts in the past. We've done press releases, the department has done press releases. Caveat enter, those are your trees. Be careful who you sell them to. Okay, here's the process. 1, hire a forester. 2, check your references. 3, have a written contract, maybe a down payment. Things like that. These are the options. We've done that time and time again, but some landowners don't see all of that. It's gonna happen no matter what. But this bill will seek to minimize it. And if we do it right, and I know that the commissioner's gonna put money in her budget for, PRs. We're gonna put it in our budget to advertise to the public. And try to educate landowners. The Vermont Woodland Owners Association will certainly put it in their newsletters. So we'll catch as many as we can.
Brian, do you have?
I was answered there at the end that education, money toward PR and educating folks is going to be there. And I think that's gonna be a big help. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd say, I have no problem with any of this. It's long been a problem. Most of the time, in my experience, if you own land and you're in current use, you already have a forester. And your forester knows who the bad characters are anyways. So the first thing we do is we contact the forester, and that happened. I think the word will get out there when there's a registry pretty fast. Most common thing I have is if you have somebody that is a little questionable, that is a logger, they most commonly go on to someone else's land next door. And that's where you get to trouble. And that's where you have all of this. So, in the bill, I like the changes that are being made around that, but that's where the most difficulty happens, is when somebody goes on someone else's land. I can't imagine a landowner that has the land, that has a signs a contract to have a forester, have somebody come in to cut. I can't imagine them not contacting your forester ahead.
I can't either, but it does happen.
I-
Because there's no requirement that you hire your
does happen,
forester.
And quite frankly, we can't go around and hold everybody's hand for my opinion. But that to me is less of a problem than the people that they look over a stone wall. They know it's an absentee landowner. They know it's some older person owning a piece of land. Look at those trees, they'll never know they're gone.
That is where it is.
That's
Why it's gotten
the
worse.
biggest problem.
Now, it is in the law, current law, that the landowner is responsible to contain the sale. If a logger crosses property line, the law is pretty clear that the landowner is responsible to keep that logger on property.
Well,
And there's actually prescriptions in the law about flagging, certain distances, things like that. So as an agent, I do that. I'll flag, double flag, the perimeter of the sale, because it isn't always the whole property, it's just a part of the property.
I would say with that, if in many cases they double flag, they do all of that work. Quite frankly, if you own land that's up on a mountain and you're even a local going to work every day, you haven't got the wherewithal to
Get up there and check on it.
get up all the time.
I get it.
So I do have a little issue when you say someone that signed a contract, they've sent their forester out there and they double flagged the boundary, that landowner is gonna be held liable. I've got a lot of, landowners that are around me now that are absentee landowners in Connecticut, and they've signed a contract with someone. I find it hard to hold them responsible for an unscrupulous,
I agree. I totally agree.
So we ought to move on to Sam Ed when we get back
Sorry.
in.
Anytime.
Yeah, thank.
Good to see you,
Ed. Sam, are you still with us?
Sure.
Well,
Yes,
I am.
yeah, well, thank you. Sorry to keep you holding, we were running by the list and, so good morning and welcome and, you can start anytime.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and nice to see you. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, and thank you for the opportunity to testify on the bill. Sorry, let me. Sorry, my screen cut out.
No, you're fine.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry. For the record, my name is Sam Lincoln, owner of Master Logger Certified Timber Harvesting Operation in Randolph Center. And in addition to my career as a farmer and logger in Central Vermont, I also served 4 years as Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation in the Scott administration, and I currently serve on the board of directors of the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast. Timber theft is a serious crime with significant impact and implications for its victims and for the greater timber harvesting industry. Prior to serving at FPR, I was aware of notorious and unscrupulous people who had used timber theft as a mechanism to victimize landowners. As a professional logging contractor, I have a lot of high priority responsibilities. At the top of that list is transparency, open communication, contract fulfillment, and being accountable to my clients. And I'm very frustrated that innocent landowners are harmed by timber thieves because it has a negative impact upon my profession. As a result of that, which is done by others, I have had people look me in the eye and tell me there's no such thing as an honest logger, and many other far more negative connotations persist with this career. In 2017, I had been at FPR as Deputy Commissioner about 6 months when I was asked to sit in on a meeting with a landowner that had been taken advantage of by one of these outlaws, not one of the ones that have been named already. As the family described what had occurred, the insufficient and misleading contract, a lack of payment, damage to their property, vanishing perpetrators, and their efforts at recovery, and legally assuming responsibility for the restoration of the land while simultaneously dealing with their eligibility for the use value appraisal program. I was shocked that this occurred and that it was associated with a profession that I had dedicated most of my adult life to. I was approached by Mr. Caribou with his very compelling story about being taken advantage of by someone who cut timber on his and his neighbor's property without being compensated properly. He's obviously amassed an enormous amount of evidence, and I'll let others testify to the specific authority, roles, and responsibilities that state agencies have, but it was plain to me at that time that FPR was unable to do much more than report it and urge law enforcement to investigate these crimes. FPR does have a statewide network of foresters with the resources to help landowners managing their forests and providing outreach materials with standard procedures and checklists that should be implemented before moving forward with a timber harvest or timber sale, but not everyone reaches out to them. And as you've heard, and FPR does not have a lot of very little enforcement responsibility. The victims have been unforgettable to me, and I feel that by not sufficiently investigating the complaints and delivering consistent and predictable justice, that law enforcement and the judicial system has failed Vermonters. A Google search of the term timber trespass in Vermont reveals that this is not new, as we've heard a lot about. And if the statutory changes that are proposed in H614 are what prosecutors need to act, I want to ensure that they are effective at punishing criminals while avoiding the unintended consequences to the inadvertent offender or unforeseen circumstances, which are also very real. The professional logging contractors of the Northeast, with our steering committee, discussed the language in several situations that are occurring in real time where a logger is caught up in a timber trespass charge after following the property or harvest boundary guidelines of another party, such as a landowner or a forester, that may have been erroneous. We are supportive of the legislation as passed by the House because it did take these concerns into consideration, and it will not impact those that do things by mistake. We'll continue to support it if it's crystal clear that professional logging contractors will not inadvertently be subject to these serious penalties due to innocent mistakes. The cynical part of me does wonder if that's even something to worry about because of the demonstrated lack of enforcement in this issue, but that's not how I'm approaching the discussion. I'm here in good faith to problem solve with this issue that's associated with the profession. But like many others, initiatives taken up by the legislature, simply writing down new laws on the paper will not solve the problem until we get to the root cause and core issue. In this case, I do believe that is a lack of enforcement or a clear path to restitution and justice for victims. We all need to learn and understand why the same bad actors are operating unbothered and how to prevent this from continuing to occur. A recent announcement of charges being filed against the Vermont Logging Company for a pattern of timber theft has been welcome news, but it took 5 years for that case just to get to this point. And after a much longer period of alleged bad behavior, it just shouldn't take this long. I believe the stakeholder study included in the legislation led by law enforcement is an essential part of the bill, and the group with the charges, as you've already heard for the group, is really important to identify. This is primarily a law enforcement issue and should be led by a law enforcement agency and subsequently supported by forestry professionals. Our sector will bring a great collection of insight and experience, but we do not wield the authority necessary to investigate these cases. Other states have been able to manage this issue with better protection for the public and the forest economy, and we must examine any and all of those policies with the potential for adapting and adopting them to think something that works for Vermont. With that, I will be happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. We heard that, this morning that these logs that are cut by these certain individuals go to multi-mills. Is there any part that the mills play in, or could they play in part of this timber theft stuff? What could they do to help us with this, the mills themselves?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator. I think the mills, the log yards, paper mills, sawmills, all can play an important role here. I'll use the example that sometimes we do hear that the wood has left the state or left the country and there's nothing we can do. But like in Mr. Caribou's case, I saw the evidence that there were reputable Vermont businesses that purchased some of that stolen timber that was subsequently stolen. And I do think we need a system in place that landowners have a way to track that through, and the mills and log yards can play a really important role as a gatekeeper. As Ed mentioned, that without some support, some system in place, that they can't necessarily publicly blacklist someone, but if we had a system in place in which the wood was tracked and the logging contractor delivering the wood was on a list that they couldn't do that, or they were required to provide evidence of the landowner for whom they had harvested the timber for in a track and trace system, that would put the mills in a position to turn away this wood or make the evidence and the information of the valuation and volume of the timber readily available to landowners to support their claims and cases. So I think they play a very important role in combating this issue.
And has that anything in the bill been added to the bill to help get these mills involved in timber theft?
Well, I think the study committee, it identifies groups and other interested parties, and so I think that I'm not here. I don't represent mills. I guess I'm speaking more from my role as formerly as deputy commissioner of seeing that is part of the landscape and part of the evidence chain. So I can't imagine that they wouldn't, but I don't speak for the mills, but I think I would certainly think they would be involved in helping solve this issue.
But like if you ship a load of wood, to a mill, the mill doesn't check you out personally, do they, to see if you're a legitimate logger or any of that?
The only thing I ever need to provide, there's one paper mill that I occasionally do business with that I have to provide GPS coordinates for the harvest site, and that's for them to verify that there's like the environmental resources or natural resource features on the site, to make sure that they call us back and say, hey, there's a wetland or a vernal pool, or there's some special natural resource feature identified on that site. How are you protecting that? But that's not universal. That's a I would say more of a rare instance. And just for so I don't ever get, there's not any requirements for me to sell timber anywhere other than that. But as an example of a practice that we do, our contracts require trip tickets, and every single load of timber, no matter how big or small, that leaves our jobs has a trip ticket with a serial number, identifying serial number on it, and that is reconciled all the way back through the system to the landowner. That's provided to them on a weekly settlement, so they can see what the load was, where it went, what product was on it, and how much it was valued at, and when it came back through. Not everybody has the same type of contracts. It's not necessarily universal, but many loggers follow that practice.
But that is from the logger. The mill doesn't send that ticket. You have to send the ticket as the logger, right?
I do, but if the mill bought the stumpage and contracted with a logger, they might provide their own trip ticket through the system. You know, there's a number of different business arrangements that are perfectly normal and customary, but where who might buy the timber and how they account for it and things like that. But there are many ways in which people can have transparent transactions. But I think the best way is for the tracking of each load that leaves the site to come all the way back around to the landowner and their agent, to make sure that everybody knows where it went, how it was paid for, and when it was paid for.
Questions? So, no. Well, thank you, Sam. And are you going to be up at the end of the week, or?
I will be in the building on Friday, and I'm also, as always, make myself available if the committee would like to discuss. Thank you. I know we're running short on time, and appreciate your look at this effort. Happy to discuss it again.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your time. I think we have one more witness, Steve.
Daniel.
Or Danielle.
And I know it's lunchtime. If you want us to come back another time, up to you. Recognize the time.
You guys got
Well,
5 minutes more,
I keep it 5 minutes.
Okay.
and then if we run out, we'll get you.
Yeah, sure. For the record, Daniel Fitzko, I'm the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation. I do also have with me Keith Thompson, who is our private lands program manager. So he oversees all the county foresters and the work with private landowners. So really more intimate with the daily of our work with landowners. I just want to start off by saying that we support this bill. It provides an expanded toolbox that law enforcement can go after these bad actors. We all have talked about the elephant in the room, that's enforcement. But hopefully the study going forward will help us identify what is the right size tool for enforcement that we need in Vermont. I want to recognize Mr. Caribou for his efforts to continue to shine a light on this. And I also recognize you've been a victim here, so heart goes out to you for that. I also want to recognize Representative Mahaley, who has done a fantastic job of bringing a lot of the partners together early on this summer, that we've come together and identified these are the tools we could use right now. One of those key players was the Attorney General's office, and some of the things that you will see here is because they feel like it will help them expand the toolbox if they need to go after these bad actors. I also want to just recognize, and you've heard it multiple times, that there are few bad actors that are putting a black eye on a really professional industry. At a really unfortunate time, it's been going on, but right now loggers are suffering pretty bad right now. You heard about the weather interruptions. We've got a voice out there that's talking about forest management is bad. So we don't want the headlines to be on these bad actors. We want to really raise the professionalism of the industry, which it really is. So I just will give you a few of the areas that we feel like this bill really helps us. It clarifies the act of a contract fraud, home improvement fraud gets expanded to be really clear that land improvement is also a case they can bring forward. So logging operations will be considered. This was key from the Attorney General's office as a tool to making sure it's clear that that piece of law can be used for logging. Making it harder to do business. The surety bond helps with that, but they have to go back and they put that surety bond there if they have committed a crime. Raising awareness of who to do business with. That registry that we talked about is really key. We will now have a list of loggers that we can go out there and say, these are the ones to avoid, not to do business with. It provides the professional associations also that tool to say, don't use these bad actors. I think we're at a moment in time where we have the industry associations and FPR really an opportunity to work together to raise awareness together. We have a confidence campaign we haven't had enough resources to really invest in it. But I think together we really want to do more to outreach to the private landowners, so call before you cut, make sure you have a contract in place. And I think we're ready in position to do that. And the last piece really is this report. We feel like these expanded toolbox, but we really got to figure out what is the enforcement mechanism that we can trust on in Vermont.
That's the study committee would come back with that, right?
Because is it track and trace? Is it identifying someone specifically in state government that's going to have this in their job description? Is it the registry? What is that one tool that we know that can be used, that we can afford, and that will actually be done, right? And so that's what this group wants to go and explore a little bit more. We don't want to have to be here a fifth time. We've been here 3 times. We want to come back a 4th time with some recommendations, but then we want to be done, get these bad actors out of the picture, and really celebrate the good forestry work that's happening in Vermont.
So if we pass the bill, there would be some parts of it that could be implemented right away. And one part of it would create this report back to further amend the bill next session, or the entire bill would go into a study. And
there's many things in here that could be implemented upon passing.
Yeah.
Right.
And the
study will say, like, these are great to have. We just want to make sure what's currently in the bill and what's currently on the books now. We have a lot of stuff on the books now. This enhances those and expands the toolbox. We just got to make sure someone's going after them. And we want to see, and if there's other tools that we actually need. And so that's what we want to explore together and come back with a recommendation of what it looks like in the future.
So, see, this bill will go from here back to judiciary. And I just want to make sure that you folks, the agency, will support the bill. I mean, I don't see where we're gonna make a lot of changes, but you would support the bill as it stands with the study coming in back of it to verify different parts.
Yeah, we have been frustrated for years as well. FPR just lacks authority. There's not much we can do. And so we feel strongly that we really want to go after these bad actors. We have the toolbox. We just want to make sure that we have the right people are picking up the tools to get it done.
Yeah, and just a quick question. You've worked at the agency for
20+ years. Yeah.
Yeah, and how many bad actors would you predict, or how many do you know that we have other than that? We've had 2, or we've had 3.
Yeah, there's the perennial ones, which I'd say are four or five maybe, and then there's some that pop in.
But that's it.
That's really, I mean, there's more that pop in, but there's really just a few serial kind of bad actors that we just really want to get out of the picture. We hope this is the set of tools here will do that for us.
Well, there's certainly, the stories that they create, which are true,
Yeah,
are pretty sad stories.
and they're smart, right? They know how to operate, and they take advantage of vulnerable individuals. They stay on property that's not enrolled in UVA many times because they would have a forester on board. Yeah, they've learned how to work it.
Well, any questions?
No,
No,
Thanks, Dan.
thanks a lot
you very
for hanging around.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee, and,